everyone, I'm Ray and welcome to my channel. In this video I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to attempt a tutorial on how I paint skin tones because some of my friends have been asking me recently, and it's not the easiest thing to explain unless you've actually got sort of examples. So I've drawn out these little spheres to explain what I mean, and then I've also got two different sketches of faces to then paint afterwards, both showing a darker skin tone and then a lighter skin tone. So I've also dug out my watercolours because I find it easier to paint skin or do anything regarding skin with my watercolours. So I'm going to set it up hopefully like this, and hopefully I won't end up spilling it, but this way you can see what I'm doing when I'm mixing them. So I'm going to try and keep the lighter skin tones this side and the darker skin tones this side. My palette is a bit stained, but there's not really anything I can do about that. But I always end up having either a spare piece of paper to the side which I swatch on to make sure that it's going to be the colour that I want, or I will swatch next to it, which is why I've got the swatches listed underneath the pictures. So you have to bear with me. Like I said, this is my first tutorial. So if I waffle a bit or I don't make a lot of sense, let me know and then I will fix it for next time. So to start off with, I'm most used to painting lighter skin tones because obviously I am almost transparent myself, so it's what I've got the most reference with. So when I was learning how to paint things in the beginning, I was using like photos of my own hands, photos of my own sort of like feet, things like that, when I was learning how to paint them. So that's how I've learned how to paint the lighter skin tones. And learning how to paint darker skin tones has been a bit of a journey for me because it's similar but it's very different. So I know that makes no sense, but hopefully when I start mixing the colours you'll see what I mean. So to start with, to make any sort of skin tone, I usually start off with either a red or a pink, and then a yellow, depending on whether you want it to be a warm skin tone or a cool skin tone will change what red or yellow you pick basically. So I'm going to start with a bit of this one, which is Quinacridone red, so it's more of a cool tone red. I've also got 2 jars of water off on the side, and then I'm also going to go with, I prefer Azo yellow over cadmium yellow because it's more transparent, and I find that cadmium yellow can be a bit I really like my watercolours to be transparent, so there's only a few uses that I'll really use cadmium yellow for. Like, it's a beautiful colour, but it is semi-opaque, so I only really use it when I'm painting things like bumblebees or flowers, something where I don't want different layers of glazing to show through. Obviously if I'm doing just a specific bumblebee then, and it's going to be up large, I'll usually use something else. But so you end up with an orange basically. So skin tones are basically, for lighter skin tones, a desaturated orange. So the way that you desaturate something is you mix in its complementary colour. So if you were to have a colour wheel, the opposite of orange would be a blue colour. So I have Cerulean or Ultramarine. Now because I'm using cooler toned ones, Ultramarine is a warm, so I'm going to go with Cerulean. You don't need much, that was obviously way too much. But you can see it doesn't look as bright anymore. So add in some more of each to bring it back to where I want it. There we go, that looks about right. So, as it's watercolours I'm using, I'm going to add some water just because I prefer to build up with layers rather than have something really pigmented off the bat, because I find you get a much nicer result that way. So you end up with, might be a little bit too yellow than what I want, so I'm going to have to drop in just a tad more blue. Been a lot more careful this time. Something like that. So you end up with a base that you can work on. Now obviously you've got places which sort of around the eyes and around the nose, and obviously the lips are going to be a lot pinker. So I usually will add in the pink that I was using beforehand. So this is Quinacridone red, so I'll just plop some of that down, take some of this, add it in. And then I always mix it with the colours that I'm using so it's got a bit more harmony, so it doesn't look like I've literally just dropped in a bright red, because it can be too much and you can end up with sort of like the clown face. So I generally tend to add my highlights in with a white gel pen or white gouache, something like that, over the top, just an opaque white medium. But for this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and leave sort of a section. So for this one, usually when I'm just adding in my own highlights later, I will just go in with a straight base layer of just the base skin tone. But because I'm going to try and keep it a little bit light in the top, I'm going to pop in just a general layer of the base skin tone. Clean off my brush, dab it off my little bit of toilet paper, and then feather out the edges a bit, just to get it to blend in, but so we've still got that highlight. I'll come back and show how to add in the extra bits. I usually wait for the layer to dry and then add it in, so that's what I'm going to do this way because that's what I'm most comfortable with. So to get a base skin tone layer for darker skin tones, it's essentially the same thing. So you pick a red. I'm going to use, what's this, Maroon, Perylene? Perylene, yeah. So I'm going to whack some of that in there. And then, because I want this to be a warmer skin tone, I'm going to use some of this, which I don't see many people using this for skin tones, but I really like it. It's Nickel Quinacridone Gold, and it's a beautiful yellow colour. So as you can see, it's already a lot darker. But then, to desaturate it, I'm going to use a little bit of Ultramarine blue. And this is not, it's a bit too olive, so more red. And yellow, and then now, because this isn't as dark as I would like it to be, I'm going to mix in a little bit of neutral tint just to give it a little bit of dark. says is a neutral tint. Or is that Moonglow? I knew I should never have put those two next to each other. Oh no, yeah, that was definitely a neutral tint. I'm gonna have to find a way to mark those. Maybe one of those CD writing pens. Sounds like a plan. So, yeah, neutral tint. Now, it is a bit cooler toned, but it really does help to give it a bit more of a darker value without just being straight black, because I do have a black watercolour, but I find it's just too harsh. There we go, that's more like something that I was looking for. Lovely. I mean, the previous one would have worked as a skin tone, but it just wasn't what I was going for. So, in order to mix a blush colour for darker skin tones, I really like using a cooler pink. So I've got this one, which it doesn't have to be this, obviously, but this is Rhodonite Genuine by Daniel Smith. It does granulate a bit, but I really like that. So whack some of that in there. And then take some of this and mix it in. Now, I know this isn't probably going to be to everyone's tastes because it is a bit more desaturated, but I really find that if I just go straight in with, say I mix in with this again, that it's going to look too much. It'll end up looking too sort of, it blends in, or it ends up looking too much like clown-esque. So I much prefer using this one with the cooler mix, but again, everyone's entitled to their own opinion. So clean water. Obviously there's not going to be so much of a broad highlight with darker skin tones. Generally they tend to be more specular. Another reason why I love watercolours, because you can get all these pretty effects. I just love it when it all feathers out. So while that one's drying, back to this one. Now, to add in sort of the blush, I find it's better to do it sparingly at first. You can see just how much difference there is. It's going to be toned down a bit because I always go over it again at the end with another layer of the original skin tone. But you can see just from this just how vibrant that red is. I always like to finish off the whole area as well, otherwise I find that I end up getting, I'm quite prone to not brushing it out fully, and then I can end up with that cauliflowering around the edges. So I find if I just finish what I'm doing and coat the entire thing, that it generally works out better for me. But that's just down to me not having amazing water control yet, so it's something I'm working on. Obviously skin has shadows depending on whereabouts you are and how the light's hitting. So for that, I find I can really go overboard way too quickly. So I would generally add in a lot of water to a tiny bit of the base tone. And then for this one, because it's a cooler skin tone with more pink, if you've got a warm light, then you will have cold shadows, and if you have a cold light, you will have warm shadows. So depending on how you plan on lighting what it is you're drawing or painting, that will affect what colours you add in order to create your shadows. So for this one, I'm just gonna go with a warmish one. Now I know this looks ridiculously pale, but if you're anything like me and you can go in way too heavy-handed, this is a godsend. Because before I was doing this, I would literally get, I'll mix it up over here, I would get just skin tone and then I would just go, oh yeah, it's a little bit off, perhaps we need a little bit more. And this is what I would be working with, which obviously it's way too dark, overpowers everything massively, just an absolute waste of time. So by keeping it a lot more subtle, having the option to build up is so much better than desperately fighting with your painting trying to take away. Because as much as you can lift watercolour, there is only so far it will go. So, this one, yeah, that one's good. So, I'm going to take my pinky colour because I really like my pinky one and do the exact same thing. The whole idea with skin is that obviously it has layers, you have veins, you have blood running underneath it. So you don't want it to look as if the blush is directly on top. You want it to look as if it's coming from within, because basically all that blush really is it's blood. It's blood under the skin that you're seeing. So the less over the top it looks, it looks more natural. Unless of course you're going for some sort of makeup type look, because they can also look absolutely amazing. I love makeup. I love it. So if that's what you're going for, then obviously using something like this would be way more, it would look as if it was over the top rather than coming through, if you get what I mean. But yeah. Shadow colours with darker skin tones, I generally find that I like to add in purple. Now at the moment the only purple I have is Dioxazine purple, but I find that it works really nicely for what I'm trying to do, at least. Again, with the trying to make sure that I don't go way too overboard with the shadow colour. So from this one we're obviously having the light from this side, same over here with the sphere. So just for argument's sake, we will pop a little bit of shadow over here, so you can kind of see what I mean with how you can build up, but it's not just taking over the piece immediately. Just because I like to feather things out, I'm going to do that. Obviously harden soft shadows, etc. But that is a story for another day. We'll do the same with this one. We'll just pop it over here. So this side is dry, and you can see we've got all the different layers going on. So the way that I will generally finish it off with the skin tones, if they're where I want them to be, obviously you can keep building and building and building, but what I generally tend to do is I will plop a little bit of water over the whole thing, and then I will lay in another layer over the top. So it just ends up harmonising everything together, and it makes it so that it looks as if, you can see where I was saying with the blush, where it comes through instead of just being sort of over the top. Now, I might have played it a little bit too safe with the blush on this side. So what I'm going to do is lay in a little bit more. Now to feather it out, what I'm doing is I'm basically just wetting my brush and then tapping the excess water off just onto this scrap bit of blue roll. Because that way I'm not flooding the paper with water, but I've still got enough moisture that I can get it to flow out a little bit so I don't get that really harsh edge. So for specular highlights, the thing that I generally tend to use is this. I have got the Derwent paint pen, which is handy, but I find that it's better for pro markers and things like that, because I find that with watercolour it tends to reactivate the layers underneath, and then it just ends up not white anymore. So, I mean, white gel pens are pretty much white gel pens. But if I was going to add freckles, what I would do is I would take the skin tone and then I would make a darker version of the shadow colour, but a bit richer. So I'm going to add in a little bit more blue. But then because all a freckle is pigmentation, it's not going to be as desaturated. So for this specific purpose I really like Maroon Perylene, because I just find that it's got a richness without being too over the top, for want of a better word. So a little bit more blue, probably too much blue. little bit more red. There we go. And then I'm gonna steal some of this skin tone again, smack it down here, add a little bit of this, and this would be what I would use for freckles. Now when I do freckles, I basically just sort of tap the brush. I'll get different sort of brushes, but I find that you get a nice variation if you just sort of do that. Also, not every freckle is going to be the same intensity. So people can have birthmarks, things like that. But the way that I will feather out some of them is tap off some of the water from some. So you've got some which are really light, some which are really dark, and then once they're dry, I would do it before the last layer of the skin tone, so that then they look like they belong into it. So yeah, onto the last layer, overall layer of our dark skin tone. So I've just mixed that up. I should have put the paper first because I've just wasted that paint. Again, I like to add just a quick layer of water so it doesn't, I don't end up with that cauliflowering strangeness. Now, as you can see, you can still see it. It'll be easier to see when it's dry, but you can still see the shadow and you can still see the blush. But again, like here, you don't want them to look as if they've just been sort of painted on. If you're trying to get them to look more natural, you want them to look as if they're underneath the skin, basically. More so with blush than with shadows, but skin has, we refract light. It's not, the skin isn't completely opaque. So when I say that, I mean if you were to get your hand and hold it over a torch, you probably wouldn't see anything coming through your palm, but you'd definitely be able to see it going through your fingers, and that's just the light bouncing around inside the skin. So it does work the same way with shadows to a certain effect. I would do the freckles the exact same way. Again, with the maroon, because I really do like that colour for freckles. But in this case, I would darken it down with a little bit of purple instead of blue. And then I would end up with a much cooler freckle tone that I just find it ends up going a lot nicer with the way that I like to paint. At least to me it does. Obviously everything's personal preference, but I've also just realised that I haven't plugged in my second light. Basically with my second light, in order to leave where I'm filming, I have to unplug it to get past, and I left the room and came back and completely forgot. So thankfully you can still see what I'm doing with one light, but meh. I really do need to learn to work on that. It's like the third time I've done it. sure what I mean about the freckles. When you lay down the layer of skin tone over the top, they look like they're more in the skin instead of just being randomly painted on top. So you wait till they're a little bit drier than that before you did it, but clearly I am extremely impatient. Now if you wanted to get this skin tone here without the granulation and the separating of the pigments, you would leave out the neutral tint. I did forget to say that earlier. But the neutral tint, I really like when watercolours granulate. So this, and skin's not perfect anyway, so with the different collections of the pigments around here, I really like it. I think it looks really beautiful, especially when it's done on portraits. But I can understand why some people would much prefer this one where there is no granulation. So it's all down to personal preference really. The best way to figure out with the paints that you've got which colours will end up not mixing the best, it's just trial and error, honestly. I used to darken my mixes for dark skin tones a lot with just by adding ultramarine blue and then adding in the dioxazine violet and doing it that way, and that would give me a similar sort of colour tone, but it wouldn't give me the granulation that I like. So I've switched up to doing it this way, and after all, this is just a video about how I do it. So there is no right or wrong way to take from the wonderful Mark Crilley. There is no right or wrong way to do anything in art, just however you prefer. So specular highlights, exactly the same thing really. It's just when I'm doing them on darker skin tones, I like to smudge them a little bit because darker skin tones are really reflective when it comes to highlights. They bounce light back a lot more, so I will generally do a bigger highlight, let it dry, and then add in more sort of key brighter points. But again, that's just personal preference. So with all of these bits and pieces, time to move on to an actual portrait. Now I have to dig out my Kneadable eraser because I need to lighten this a little bit before I go in, because I did go a little bit heavy on the pencil. I'm also going to wipe out my palette and start making a new skin tone from scratch. The paper that I'm using for this is Fabriano Artistico hot press extra white watercolour paper. I know it has all those things in the title, I'm not sure if that's the exact right way. I know it's got a really long name though. I don't have a specific drawing board which is the right size for fitting here, so I've just got it stuck to the back of a Canson XL sketchbook. And when I'm done with this one, I will take it off and stick the other one exactly where I've got that. I do have a great big wooden A3 one, but I painted the inside of my writing bureau to be like a galaxy because I much prefer to work on something that I think looks pretty. So, but I don't like taping stuff down to it because I've done it before and it ends up ripping up some of the little sparkles. As much as I've glazed it about 20 times, I think I went a little bit heavy with it, so naturally some just randomly comes off. So now I prefer to use a spray bottle, but you can just use a large watercolour brush and just work it all in there, get it all up. moving about, so you can remove it easier, especially down in the corners. I find it gets stuck and it doesn't want to go. I'm really excited for Christmas this year because I'm finally going to get the last few watercolours to fill up my palette. I've got 4 random bits and pieces, so I've picked out the colours that I want, and some very nice friends of mine have offered to get me individual ones, so that way I can finish it up, because watercolour paints are expensive. I've been building this set for a whole year. I started with Quinacridone Red, Cadmium Yellow and Cerulean, and I did everything with those because I had the Winsor & Newton Cotman set, and I've been transferring over to higher grade paints because I've just got better with watercolour, and I found that some of the things that I've wanted to do I've not been able to. So, but I've just been slowly adding sort of one every month, every other month as it goes, and I really enjoy these paints so much more than the common ones. The common ones are good, but you do have to layer up a lot to get a lot of pigment, whereas these ones you barely have to touch them. Especially with the Maroon Perylene, I only have to look at it and it's just like pigment everywhere. So they're definitely worth the investment if you're thinking about doing it, but at the same time don't feel like you have to have the best paints in the world. That you can do just as good, if not better, artwork with something like a Winsor & Newton Cotman set. You just need to spend the time to layer it more, so you'd have to use a stronger, more durable paper, is the only thing. So you won't be able to get some of the colour mixes, and some of the colours they won't actually do in the student range sets, but overall it's just really, if you've got the money that you would like to invest in them, then by all means do so, because there is definitely a noticeable difference. But if all you can afford is the Winsor & Newton Cotman ones, I've had them for years. I still have my set, and I still, if I'm going on holiday or if I'm going away, I will take that set, because I know that I can do everything that I want to do with it, but I also don't have to worry that I'm taking, like, some of these tubes of paint were over £10 per tube, and especially with the Daniel Smith ones, like, that is half of the tube squeezed out there because it was a 5mm tube. Same here. And I don't want to worry about wasting all of that paint, because it is so much more expensive to just replace it. So yeah, but without further ado, let's crack on into painting these portraits.